Welcome to the show. My guest today is a writer who is very hard to pin down. Some readers know him for supernatural horror, some for his noir and literary fantasy novels, others even know him for a children's book. I'm Jack Rollins, and today's Fiendish mind is Lex H. Jones. Hi Lex, how are you doing?
I'm all right, thank you. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you. I'm really pleased to have you on. I've been dying to get a chat with you
Thank
uh,
you.
ever since I was reading The Old One and the Sea to my sons. I've been dying to pick your brain,
Okay, good.
but we'll come to that eventually. We'll come round to the Old One and the Sea. Anyway, how are you keeping during this weird period that we're in, this lockdown? How are you keeping yourself entertained?
Well, I'm all right actually because my day job, I can do from home. So in terms of like how I'm filling the days, I don't really have any more free time than I did before. It's
Right.
just that I'm spending my work hours at home in like the home office as opposed to being at work in the office. But apart from like the half an hour commute there and back, I don't actually have any more time than I did before. So there's the boredoms of not being able to go that many places and see people, but
Yeah.
beyond that, it's not vastly different in terms of like I know other people who have been like fully furloughed, so suddenly they've got all day every day back, and that's a complete transformation of their life, particularly when you can't go anywhere and do anything. But I think I'm in a much more fortunate position with regards to not suffering with boredom and whatnot in that respect.
That's all right as long as you're enjoying your work. Can I ask what you do by day?
Yeah, I'm a software test analyst. So I work for a software company that makes software that they sell to other businesses, and I have to basically try and break it and find faults with it before it goes out to the customer, so that they can then be fixed and whatnot. So other people will develop it, and then I will try and find things that are wrong with it in at various tiers of the software.
In your downtime, and not sort of being able to maybe go out and do what you normally would, does that have any impact on your creativity? Are there any influences or inspirational places or anything that you can't go?
I'm not particularly worried about getting any writing done. It's kind of come at quite a fortuitous time with regard to that because I have got two books. One, the first book in a series of novels, and the other, my first collection of short stories, which were both kind of in the pipeline to be released. It was supposed to be this year, but they're probably going to be next year now. And they're both with the respective publishers. And I have got edits to do for both of those. So my plan for this year wasn't really to do anything vast with regards to new writing because I was focusing on that.
Right.
So apart from a
Yeah.
couple of short stories here and there, I haven't really been planning on doing any new writing anyway, so much as editing those things, and that hasn't really changed. So it's not like I was planning to write a brand new novel or anything this year, and then this has you know put the stops to that for whatever reason. So it's not really affected that, which is quite lucky. I've just had to manage my schedule slightly differently because I also that's worked out quite well with regards to the fact that I'm not in a particular mindset to do any writing because while I'm sat at home on my laptop all day, I don't then want to be sat at home on my laptop in my free time. So the desire to do any writing, which is essentially what writing is, so the desire to do that isn't particularly strong at the moment anyway. So the fact that I don't have anything that I particularly desperately need to get done right now is quite lucky in that respect.
Yeah. Yeah. It sounds like you've got plenty of sort of work in the pipeline. Um,
Oh yeah, I always try and stay a few books ahead of like what I'm sending out because I don't want to be at the point where I send something out, it gets accepted, and then I've got nothing. So I've always got like at least one or two novels that I haven't sent anywhere yet, and at least one or two short stories that I haven't sent anywhere yet. And I always try and sort of keep that backlog. it also means that like if something's a series, for instance, and if something gets accepted and they like it, and then they want the second book in the series, you don't suddenly have to, oh God, I've got 6 months to write the next one.
Yeah.
You've kind of got ahead of yourself, and you don't end up in a Game of Thrones situation where people are waiting forever for the next book. So
I suppose in Martin's context, it's not a bad position to be in, but I wouldn't like that stress myself.
he can't be that stressed about it. It's taken him 10 years. I don't think he's that bothered.
True.
I don't think it's keeping him up nights, to be honest.
True enough. What I find interesting though is I think for a lot of writers, if they were saying, I can't write anything new at the minute, they'd kind of be panicking about that a little bit, that there's been this interruption to producing new material.
It's not through choice though, is what I was saying, is that like I wasn't going to write anything apart from a couple of short stories. I wasn't going to write anything vastly new this year anyway.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, it's kind of couldn't have fallen at a better year really, because like that was my plan for this year, and then next year I wanted to write the next books in these series, and that would have been worse because I'm trying to write a whole new novel and it doesn't really work when I've got this massive change in schedule. But yeah, the fact that it's fallen this year when I was already planning on kind of editing stuff as opposed to starting new stuff has kind of worked out okay.
Good.
It's not that I've wanted to write something new and I've suddenly been unable to, because that would be massively stressful.
Yeah, it sounds like you've got a good sense of direction. When did you first get started out, Lex?
What, with writing?
With writing, yeah.
Well, that's a strange one really, because it's something I've kind of always done ever since childhood. I've written just for the hell of it because I've enjoyed it. I always liked telling stories. Before I did it via the medium of writing, I used to do like, when you play with your action figures and that kind of thing, I'd always like to make up a story rather than just bashing them together or simulating something you'd already watched on television. So I always liked the idea of a story and telling it in some way. And then when I could read and write myself, I used to write stories just for the fun of it. Sometimes I'd let people read them, sometimes I wouldn't. And then when I became a teenager, I kind of entered that point of where you don't let anyone listen to the songs you've written, or in my case, the stories you've read and hear the stories you've written.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I was in my sort of mid-20s that I started thinking about genuinely sending it out to people and seeing. I mean, I'd always got a nice response from the people who had read it, but you always do, because it's going to be your friends and family, isn't it? Yeah, unless you've got some really shitty friends and family, they're not going to read it and tell you that it's rubbish. So, just because your mum reads it and says it's wonderful, that doesn't really count for anything. So, but I eventually thought, I'll send something out and give it a go. And the first thing I sent out, quite a few things actually didn't get published, but the response I got from them, even though it was a rejection, was kind of positive enough that it made me think, okay, this is perhaps something I could do. I haven't written the right book yet, but it wasn't a case of we haven't even read this, don't bother. It was publishers and agents saying, this is really good, we really like your writing style, you're a strong writer, we don't feel that we can find the right fit for this book, but keep trying. Which is like, it's like you're auditioning for a band and someone says you're an amazing guitar player, but you're not the right fit for this band.
Absolutely.
As opposed to saying you can't even string two notes together. The difference in those two rejections, one of those is going to make you think you're never going to achieve it no matter what band you audition for, where the other is going to make you think, okay, I can do this, but this just wasn't the right project.
That must have been quite reassuring for you back in the day. To not get the standard rejection.
I honestly had no idea. I mean, you don't know until you enter that professional field. It's like, I mean, using the music analogy again, but music kind of works as an analogy for creative ventures, because you get that immediate feedback. If I write a book and send it out, you don't know if it's any good until months later. Whereas you playing a song, you stand up in the audience, you know immediately afterwards whether that performance was any good or not, because you've got that immediate reaction. So it kind of works as a good analogy in that sense.
It makes sense.
But so when you first send your work out into the ether in that way, you've got no idea what people are going to think to it, or whether it's good or not. Or, because I mean, you might be massively overconfident and think it's amazing, but you might also be terribly underconfident and think it's terrible. But where it actually lies in between those two extremes, you don't know until you get it in the hands of some professional people whose job it is to vet this kind of thing and decide whether or not it's worth their investment.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I was talking to Kyle Scott the other day, and we were talking about that point when you've shared a piece of work with your friends or some family, and you get that initial feedback, and you start realizing there comes a point when you realize, these people just they are going to be kind, and it's nice and it's a confidence boost, but it's not necessarily that critical eye. Sometimes you need someone who's going to rip right into it and tell you where the weaknesses are that you're going to have to shore up if you want
Yeah,
to write in the
absolutely.
future.
Because the alternative is, like on talent show things like X Factor and American Idol and
Mm-hmm.
that kind of thing, you get these people who go up and stand there in front of thousands of people and start singing, and you think, how has nobody told them that they can't sing?
Yeah,
How have they been allowed to get this far in life and nobody's told them that they can't sing? And it's kind of like that. If all you ever get is your mum and dad and your friends saying, "Oh, it's brilliant! It's the best thing I've ever read," if that's all you hear, then you're going to be that guy stood up on stage who's tone deaf. You need someone at some point to tell you, "Nah, this bit's crap. That doesn't work. You need to rewrite that." You've got to have that, otherwise you're never actually going to hone your ability to write into anything stronger that's actually
yeah,
worth people's time to read. Because people reading is an investment of time, isn't it? If you're going to read a novel, that's quite a few hours of your time. I mean, the initial outlay is not that expensive. Most books are under a tenner, but this time sink that you lose into
absolutely.
this, if you're going to ask somebody to dedicate that to your work, it's got to be worth that time.
And they're spending that time on their own. They can't bounce off somebody else's enjoyment. Like if I'm watching even a crap horror movie or a crap comedy, if the person I'm watching it with is having a bit of a giggle, they might draw me. They might kind of pull me along with them. Whereas when I've
Oh,
got
that's
that book in my
very
hands,
true. Yeah,
it's
yeah.
purely my experience of that book, isn't it? So
That's true of things like video games and all sorts of things, isn't it? Where if it's a shared experience, however bad it is, if you're with someone who, like you say, you can take joy through the fact that you're
yeah,
enjoying it with this person, then it's enjoyment regardless of the quality of the art itself. Whereas with the book, if it's crap, it's just crap. There's no, like you say, you can't get any other source of joy out of it.
yeah. I was just before when you were saying how you kind of built up the the storytelling throughout your life. Um, you, when you were saying about playing with the action figures and stuff, I always think that that's such an important thing, and the way that you described playing with your toys when you're a kid, you were basically describing me as a kid too. And I noticed today on social media some of your recent action figure purchases
Mm.
very much get my seal of approval, because those were the originals of those were the action figures that I was
Well,
cutting my teeth with, those
just to
Ghostbusters.
explain what they were, it was the Ghostbusters toys from the late 1980s, and they've reissued them now. They're basically exactly the same
Yep.
toys in the same packaging. Even like on the Slimer toy, it says Green Ghost on it because when
Yeah,
that
that's
toy
right.
was released originally, they hadn't named him Slimer at that point,
That's
so
right.
it's still and that says it on the pack and all that kind of stuff. And the reason I bought those is because earlier this year, I cleaned out one of my spare rooms and decided to use it to kind of. I've got all my DVDs in there, my books are in there. It's all nice. It used to just be that room where you just threw crap, but now it's all nice and organized. And there's DVDs and books and video games and board games in there and shelves and stuff. And I sold most of the stuff that I had as a kid when I moved out from my parents' house. But there's just one or two things which I've kept, which I kind of have an emotional attachment to, and I've put those on little shelves like the 80s toy shelf. And something I remember, and something I had, I've always liked He-Man and Skeletor as
Yeah,
a favorite character, but I never had any of the He-Man toys brand new. So
right.
for my birthday, oh, no, actually, it was Christmas last year. My girlfriend bought me, similar to the Ghostbusters toys, they've reissued
Yeah,
the He-Man ones in the packaging. So she got me a Skeletor in the package. So I hung that up on the wall on a nail. And then I quite like the idea of getting some other figures in packages to have like along in the gaps on the walls in between shelves and stuff, because I thought it looked quite cool to do that with the retro packaging and stuff. So I've just been buying ones that I can find. It's not like a hobby or anything. It's just if I see something, I think, oh yeah, I'll get that one. So like the Ghostbusters was the latest addition to that, and I just got Slimer and Stay Puft and Ray Stancer was my favourite one. And yeah, they're just up on the wall now, which
Yeah.
I think they look really good. I love the retro aspect of it. I just think I love how they look. I'm not into action figures as a thing that people collect. I know people have, they'll pay like £45 for one these days,
Yeah.
which is because they're like proper sculptures. I get that, but I'm not into all that. I just like the retro carded sort of ones.
These are very specific as well, aren't they? It's obviously if you were into that, the movies or the cartoon, or you had the toys when you were a kid.
There's got to be like an emotional attachment. I think if you don't have that, if you're not our sort of age, I mean, I'm 35. If you didn't grow up with that, I think like for instance, I've got a nephew who's about 12. He'd look at that and think, "What's this crap old toy?" There's no, the quality of that compared to the action figures he'd grown up with and everything. There'd be no reason why he would want that. But it's very much something for like a nostalgic thing.
Yeah.
But just to go back to that a second, when you said about playing the way in which you played with them, that was possibly the first time I was aware that perhaps the way my brain worked with regards to stories was not the norm, because I have a very specific memory of a kid, of playing with toys with a bunch of other kids, and they were like, "Oh, let's play Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles," and to me that meant you all pick which characters you're going to play with, and then you just make up a story that you're going to play. That's how everyone plays, isn't it? But they were all talking about basically. I think the question was, should we do the first film or the second or one of the episodes of the cartoon? And it was like, oh, they're just basically going to recreate something we've already seen. And when I suggested, why don't we just make up something new? The look I got was like you just suggested, why don't we all set ourselves on fire? It's like that was the first time I realized that maybe not every kid thinks like this. And that's always a bit of a strange thing as a kid, because you spend a lot of time in your head as a child, as an adult, but you don't really have much awareness of how other people think, do you? So whatever it might be, that first time that you realise, oh, not everybody thinks the way I do, that can be shocking, whatever it's about, But that was the first time that I thought maybe my sort of fondness for telling stories is not something that everybody shares. It doesn't mean not everybody can do it, but maybe a lot of people can't be bothered, or maybe it just doesn't occur to them that might be interesting. But that is a very specific memory that I have of perhaps the first time I was aware that, oh, okay, this isn't something that everybody does.
Well, I definitely would have played all right with you. We would have been making up our own adventures from scratch.
I just don't get why you wouldn't want to do that.
Exactly. Again, seeing the figures that you'd got there, that brought some good memories back for me. And my boys, they like the Ghostbusters, but we got all the Playmobil figures for ours. They're
quite good those, aren't they?
They're really good sets. And they did the real Ghostbusters, the animated series version. They did the Playmobil version of them, which were the first ones my boys got. So a lot of good memories there when I saw those figures. Obviously, we've talked about the influence of sort of that type of play in developing an approach to story.
It's very important that, as opposed to, I mean, video games and stuff like that develop a whole other set of skills, so I'm not knocking that. But I think too much of that kind of thing where you're being fed the story.
And it's like on a rail.
As opposed to doing it yourself. I think kids, to me, oh God, you sound so old when you say stuff like this, but kids don't have enough time to be bored anymore. Like when you'd sit in the back of when you'd sit in the back of a car to go somewhere as a kid for like an hour and a half journey, and you just stare out the window and you just make things up in your imagination. There's none of that now, because you'd have a tablet in your hand.
Yes.
Or a mobile phone. So you just think, are we potentially losing a lot of future creative kids through this?
It's an interesting thought.
It is something that worries me, just like the sheer lack of time where you'd sit and just make up a story to yourself or whatever. Why would you ever decide to do that if you're constantly being fed things? Here's television, here's video games, here's a tablet, here's social media, if you've always got something coming at you to fill your brain, when are you going to do? Why would you bother to sit there and make up your own stuff?
I totally agree. And even as an adult, I found myself at times where I've been too engrossed in like binging a series, and at some point I've thought, hang on, I'm letting someone else tell me the story. I'm supposed to be a storyteller. I need to get away from this screen and into the other room and start bloody
Yeah,
writing on
I get
my
what you
screen.
mean.
Yeah,
It's
you've got
very
to
easy,
wrestle
isn't
with
it?
it. It
Yeah,
is. It's easy to get sucked in.
yeah, very much so. It's not something you can just say, "Oh, kids today." It's something we all do, really, because we all live in that same world of constant sort of entertainment.
Well, everything's trying to snatch everybody's attention, isn't it? It's like
Yeah,
eyeballs on money, and it's hard sometimes, isn't it, to keep your creative eyes to yourself and give yourself that time.
yes, yeah,
Um,
it is. Yeah.
do you have any specific sort of influences, say like books that you were reading at any point that kind of have helped sculpt the way that you tell a story?
With regards to horror, I always, which a lot of my stories are. It's not all. I would never describe myself as a horror writer because if you thought that and then went and bought my three novels, none of them are horror, so that would confuse you. But I've got a large volume of short stories out in the ether in different collections, which are all horror, and it is like my first love, really. My influences on that are all kind of like quite old fashioned Victorian or Edwardian ghost stories because I like the subtlety. I like from films. I like all sorts of horror. You name it, and I enjoy it. But for written horror, I'm not into the slasher. I'm not into the gore or the torture porn or anything like that. I like the haunted house. I like the
Yeah,
foggy woodlands and the creepy moors and the swamps and the, hammer horror sort of stuff. That kind of really old fashioned, for authors sort of like M.R. James, that
M.R.
kind of,
James. Yeah,
even Charles Dickens is himself.
yeah,
He wrote Charles Dickens wrote quite a few, and various other. Henry James is another one. There's all sorts of like your old school sort of subtle horror
yes,
in terms of the ghost story, and that's kind of my wheelhouse with regards to what I write as well. Not to the quality of any of those guys, but that's the sort of thing that has a very strong influence on my work. If anyone ever is describing my work in reviews and stuff, and this kind of describe again, not comparing the quality but the tone of it, it's
yeah,
usually a name like M.R. James that comes up in terms of if you like that kind of thing, you might like this. And I think that's very deliberate in terms of influence. That's the kind of thing I read and then thought I want to write something in that kind of style. And that's
yeah.
always been the case.
No, there's nothing wrong with that. That's if that's if your work is bringing that to mind and say if people are saying if you like M.R. James, you will like, then I think that's for me that's a safe direction to be heading in because I do like a bit of James, like so.
Yeah, it's always a massive compliment when someone says that, and it has come up a few times about some of the ghost stories I've written. So I just think it's kind of the template for me for like how you tell a good ghost story, and that's my favorite sort of horror to do is a ghost story. So it makes sense that I'd go with the one that I was most inspired by.
And is that why your horror stories have tended to be more the short story, or do you feel like you have a horror novel in you at some point?
Well, generally speaking, this is one of those things I don't like to. I never say never,
Mm.
but I've never thought of a horror story that I thought an individual story that could be fleshed out into a full novel. And I think I'm not going to say any, but I'm sure you can think of some horror authors who you read a book and you think this should have been a short story. This mate, there's no need for this to have been 300 pages. Where it feels stretched out. Where
Yeah.
you've got three chapters talking about this one guy who walks into the shop one day and his backstory, but he's only actually in the story for 2 pages after that. And you think, why did I
Yes.
need to know all that? Why was that? How is that relevant? That kind of thing. And I don't ever want to be writing something like that. So if I think of a horror story that I think is worth doing as a full novel and genuinely has enough material to make it one, then I absolutely will. But until then, I won't. I mean, I do have a book, one of the books that's you know meant to be coming out this year, but it's not going to happen now. It'll probably be next year. Is a full novel length, and it is horror, but it's kind of told in an episodic fashion because it's a detective and he investigates supernatural stuff, and kind of each chapter details a different case. They do all kind of link together, but there is kind of an episodic nature to it. So I still wouldn't class that as one story being told the length of a novel, if that makes sense.
Yes. I think I've heard you mention this set of stories before. and I've got to say, I'm looking forward to those stories coming out, because it sounds like a
Thank
bit of
you.
me.
Yeah,
Yeah,
do you want me to just describe it?
please
So,
do.
yeah, okay. So it's set in Victorian London. It's called The Final Casebook of Mortimer Grimm, and it's set in Victorian London, and it follows this detective who's a private detective, and his name is Chester Harkins. Harkins has got the ability to see the supernatural world, so mostly ghosts, but demons and stuff as well. And he's had that since childhood. It's like a natural gift. He doesn't like it. He's never liked it. He's spent most of his life sort of drinking and taking drugs quite heavily to block it out.
Mm.
Then something happens to him on one of his cases whereby paying attention to what he can see actually helps him get a resolution for the first time. And after that, he decides to learn more about it. So he seeks out an occultist who can help him. And the guy he finds is named Mortimer Grimm. But Mortimer Grimm, who's an expert in the occult and a detective himself, is actually dead. He is a ghost. And his
Ah,
last investigation got him killed. So Harkin says to him, I will help you solve your final case, which will let you sort of move on to whatever comes next. And in return, you're going to teach me everything that you know about the supernatural world. So they kind of go through Victorian London and investigate various things leading up to the final case which Grimm was working on. Now, Harkins himself is very unusual for a Victorian detective, which is a very deliberate decision for me, because if you think about your classic Victorian detective, you do think of Holmes as the obvious example, but there's a lot of others, but they all kind of stick to that similar sort of template, whereas Harkins is, he's clever, but he's not like some super genius. He's not massively well educated. He's not rich. He's very much like an East End rough and ready detective. If he can get his answers more quickly by breaking your teeth rather than studying how you tie your shoelaces, then he's going to do that.
yeah.
He's not. The way I describe it is like if you were thinking about immediate casting choices. If you're thinking of Sherlock Holmes as Benedict Cumberbatch, then Harkins would be more like Danny Dyer.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
that kind of that's the sort of the way you're looking at. So
Like a geezer.
yeah, still intelligent, still, not like just picking a fight for
No.
any reason, but he's still, he's more street smart than book smart, and he's that kind of detective, which is unusual for a Victorian detective, which is why I thought I would do that. Whereas Grimm himself is much more typical of like the classic Victorian detective, so you kind of get that partnership between them. And that is, like I said, a full novel length, but each chapter is a different investigation.
Excellent.
So it's almost like a collection of short stories featuring the same characters that do have a through narrative as opposed to just one long story.
And is that book sitting with the publisher at the minute?
Yeah, it's all published and accepted and everything. It's going through editing at the moment, and it was meant to be out this year, but obviously that's not happening with the current situation because there's no bookshops. I can't go to any book fairs and do the release events or
Yeah.
anything like that. So they spoke to me about it, and I said I would rather just push it back a year because I've I wrote this book quite some time ago, and I've been waiting for a publisher for it for quite a few years. So I
Yeah.
would rather wait and do it properly rather than have it out now and kind of get it a bit half-assed.
No, good for you, man. I mean, that's a brave decision. Like, and probably a very wise one given the situation.
Well, everyone, you put so much effort into these books, and the editors put so much effort into refining it for you, and the guys who do the cover make so much effort into it, and everything has so many people working so hard to make this a wonderful thing for people to
Yeah.
buy. So to just have it come out and sort of fall by the wayside because of circumstances beyond your control, you don't want that to happen, either for yourself or for anyone else who's been involved in it or made a financial commitment to it. So it's better. I'd rather just wait. I think it's better to just wait.
I can tell you, I'm going to be at the front of that queue when
Thank
when
you.
that comes out. I'm looking forward to that. You mentioned a little bit earlier about the idea of working at your laptop all day and then it not really being very seductive at the minute they thought of sitting at the laptop again all evening. So I guess when it comes to writing, are you straight into the keyboard, or do you like to write things out longhand on paper or copious notes? How do you like to work? What's your
Well,
process?
I used to not need notes when I was younger because my memory was quite like I'd have an idea for a story and I'd just remember the whole thing. So when I
Mm,
came to write it down, I could just reel it out. But my brain doesn't work like that quite as well anymore now. I'm on the downward slope towards 40, and I'll have an idea, and by the time I get to write it, it's gone. So I make much more notes now. I don't write the whole thing out longhand and then type it up. The first time I write it, the actual story is still very much when I hit the keyboard, but I will have typed notes or written notes. I will have quite a fair amount of notes before that, which is just like, flashes of a bit about a specific character or a description of a character or a scene that you've got very vividly in mind that you don't know where it fits yet, but you know you want this to happen, and that kind of thing. And then I will write all those notes down, and then it's kind of like a connect the dots story, like this leads to that, and then that very nicely leads into this bit that I want. It just kind of fleshes out as you go along, and then you go back and do it again and over again until it's something that's worth sending off to be read by somebody. But yeah, I do tend to make much more notes now than I used to do.
Do you like to have the whole thing, that sequence, do you like to plot it out up until the end, or do you like to fly by the seat of your pants towards the end of it and see where it takes you?
Honestly, depends on the story. With the Old One on the Sea, which we'll obviously talk about in a bit,
yes.
that I had planned out very carefully, everything that was going to happen in it. I've also written a crime novel, which is called The Other Side of the Mirror. With it being a crime novel, kind of everything that happens is important. So, because it's like a jigsaw puzzle, so you can't just chuck pieces in a jigsaw box that aren't actually part of that picture. So, again, everything matters. But then there's been ghost stories that I've written, like the most recent one I've had published, where I had a very vivid, like the one I've just written. I had this scene in mind of a normal suburban street somewhere in Britain, and the ground just cracking open like an earthquake, but not an earthquake. And this guy just furiously bundling his kid into a car and trying to outrun it, and then listening onto the radio to what was happening, and strange events kind of happening, as they're going along, revealing what's actually happening here. And that was the only thing I had in my mind. So I literally just wrote that scene and then just saw where it took me as I wrote it, really. I didn't know what the ending was. I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't know what the resolution of anything, if there was one, would be. But about halfway through, I found the character saying something to his daughter, which made me think, oh, that's an avenue we can go down. So then that then made me think of something that I could then, on the second draft, I retroactively introduced a couple of seeds to that earlier on, and then it kind of went from that. So, and that's kind of how it is with me. Sometimes I do have the entire thing planned out, and it's just a case of kind of putting meat on those bones. And other times I've got a very specific start in mind, or a very specific middle, or a very specific end, and I write it and see where it goes.
That's great. So you just get started with just that notion, or this vision of the ground cracking up. Right, I'm going to run with that and just see where the hell it goes. And like you say,
That
seed
doesn't
things
always
come
work.
back, and
It
but
doesn't always work. I have done that before, and I've just found that the answer to where's this gonna go is nowhere.
nowhere.
And you get a
Yeah,
few pages in, and you think, nah, I can't do anything with this. I never destroy it. I'll just save that file, because perhaps one day I'll think, oh, I know what I could do with that now, or perhaps it might become like there were a couple of stories like that I didn't know what to do with, that ended up becoming cases that Harkins investigated. So
yeah.
there's things like that, where you can't quite find the right protagonist for it or something. But if you've got a book series, which Harkins is, and the nature of that series is him investigating a lot of stuff, then perhaps he could be the right protagonist for this, and that kind of thing. So I never completely discard an idea, but there have been as many successes as I've had with that. There has been as many that have just kind of been left half created because it just didn't go anywhere, and I didn't want to force it.
That's the name of the game, I suppose, though, isn't it? It's just
Yes.
sifting, and at least you're critical enough of your own work to go, well, I'm not going to try and force this.
Yeah, I'm always conscious of. This is a completely different avenue of discussion, but I suffer from high functioning anxiety disorder, which manifests itself in various different ways in my life, but one of which is like overthinking things. So I'm always very conscious of wasting anybody's time. So anything I'm asking people to partake in for my sake, it needs to be, I'm very conscious of it being worth their time to do so. So if I'm having a party that I want people to come to, it's going to be a really good party. if I'm having a games night, it's going to be a really good games night. If I'm writing a story, it's going to be a really good a story for people to read, because I'm very conscious, and my mind will not let me get over the fact that people are deciding to spend their time on something that you have put together, and it cannot be bad, you know? So
Yeah.
I would rather not release a story at all rather than send something off that I was going to overthink myself to death because I thought it was bad.
Well, I can't tell you how many months I've sat there thinking about starting this podcast, and how much encouragement I've needed behind the scenes, because I'm, for all
Sort
this
yourself
just
out.
undermining myself,
Yeah,
talking myself,
totally
and
understand that. Yeah.
knotted up with anxiety about a million other things. And it's only in recent months that I've kind of unpicked a lot of those knots, that I came to a point where I just went, I'm bloody doing this, and I'm
Yeah,
going to
you
do this
should.
to
You
enjoy
should.
it. And
I mean, 90% of podcasts, well, probably more than that, but 90% of podcasts is someone talking to other people for their own sake about something they find interesting. And then other people will either find that interesting or they won't. But that, you are not doing anything any lesser than any other podcast there. So there's absolutely no reason to think that you're doing something that's inadequate or anything like that, because that is exactly what a podcast is. It's the host talking to people about a subject that they're interested in. And the worst kind of podcast or television interviews or anything is where you can tell that the host has kind of been forced to have this guest
yeah,
on, but they don't actually give a crap.
yeah,
That's no one wants to listen to that. Whereas
hear
if
other
you listen
company talking points, stick to
yeah,
them.
exactly. Yeah, yeah. But if it's something that you're genuinely passionate about and you're picking your guests and stuff, then that's always fun to listen to. But yeah, I totally understand the notion of talking yourself out of it repeatedly and everything.
Well, it sounds to me like you're having a really good period with your anxiety, where you're able to see things clearly and put all your work together in a constructive way for you, which I know that can be a battle just from personal experience.
Yeah, it can. It can. Yeah, it certainly comes and goes with how easy that is. But yeah, when I think that's why one of the reasons I like to plan things so much is because nothing ever seems quite as bad when it's written down. When it's
Yes.
floating around in your head, it seems like this unachievable nightmare. But then when you actually write it down, you think, oh, that's not that bad. All I need to do is this, this, and this.
Yeah. I think when it's just in your head as well, that's where all those undermining thoughts are, all those unhelpful thoughts that are snatching at your attention. You
Yeah, and
need those good ideas out.
they're usually massively unrealistic as well. The worries that you've got about something, the possible worst case scenarios and stuff. It's never as bad as that. What you're thinking in your head, and if you were talking to someone else and they told you that this is what I'm worried about, you'd say that's ridiculous. That's
Oh,
never going to
yeah,
happen.
absolutely. It's funny though, the things you let yourself believe when you're going down that tunnel and you can't sort of turn around and get out of it.
Oh yeah, yeah.
But it is
The,
the
the,
way
the
it is, I
truth is,
guess.
it sounds really pessimistic, but the reality is that other people don't care about you half as much as you think they do. So, like, you know what I mean? You putting out something that you think is bad. The chance, unless you're like a world famous author who's got a following of millions of people, the chances of that many people being that bothered that you put out a story that wasn't that good is pretty slim.
Yeah.
It's not going to be some like world-ending event.
So, in terms of getting yourself into the right frame of mind to sit and do your writing, do you what's your environment like? Do you have to have silence? Do you like a soundtrack playing or something? What time of day do you like to work?
No, I don't really worry about that kind of thing too much because I used to. Again, I've learned from mistakes here, and I think if you get too precious about that kind of thing, you'll never get anything done. Like you see writers who's like, oh, I've got to have this perfect music on, and the humidity's got to be just right, and the temperature, and I've got to have my drinks lined up, and you know what I mean,
Yeah.
and then all it takes is neighbour next door being a bit loud, and I can't do anything. If you make yourself this like precious little flower about it, you're never going to get anything done. So you just need to get over yourself in regards to that, and just if you've got a chair and a laptop, you need to be able to write. Otherwise you're just creating problems for yourself.
Let's talk about the first book that you put out then. So we've talked a bit about your process. We know what you're working on at the minute and what's in the pipeline. Let's go right back. Let's talk about your first release. What was that?
That was a novel called Nick and Abe, which was an unusual choice for me because it was one of those ideas that I didn't think was one of my best ones. But as I said previously, I'd tried to get a couple of novels published before that to no avail. And I decided to write that one. It was like an idea I'd always kind of benched, and then I decided, okay, we'll give it a go. And I wrote it and had it professionally edited a couple of times, and then sent it off somewhere. And yeah, they wanted it, and then the response to it critically and everything was really really good. Now, the story of the novel, just to sum it up quickly, is God and the devil decide to spend a year on Earth as mortal men, to kind of as like a wager, if you like, to see who knows the most or the least about humanity. But in doing so, kind of being transformed into humans in that way kind of forces them to accept the problems in their own relationship as father and son or something very close to it, and sort of analyze that in a way that they've never done before. So it becomes much more about a family struggle rather than some like big cosmic game of chess with humanity. So it's kind of taking these very old, very ancient, very large philosophical questions and dealing with them like a family who had a split many many years ago and have never quite got over it. And yeah, like I said, it's a very subtle story. It's very small scale. It doesn't have a great deal of massive events in it and anything. It's an awful lot of conversations. But yeah, people really responded really well to it.
It's funny, isn't it, that you describe a story about God and the devil and thousands of years of creationist religion, and it's a small story.
Yeah, but I think how else are you going to tell that in a way that it's relatable? You know, so
True, true.
you can either go down the comedy route of it, or you could, which is one way of handling it, or you can make it like some big apocalyptic thing, and there's far too much of that already. And and the other thing is that I'm an atheist, so I don't care about honouring any particular representation of this, in the sense that if you're a Catholic, then whether you mean to or not, your representation of God is going to be a very Catholic inspired orientation. If you're a Jewish person, then your inspiration, your the way you write God is going to be inspired very much by the Jewish faith, and so on and so on. Whereas if you're not any of that, like I'm not, then you don't have that kind of bias, if you know what I mean. That subconscious bias is towards making him kind of like your God, as opposed to this universal figure that's supposed to represent everybody. So I was very keen on that. It doesn't particularly pay homage to any specific version of that. I mean, it's arguably Christian because there's God and the devil as two separate characters, and they are father and son, and some of the details described are very much part of the Christian faith, but it doesn't kind of nail itself to a specific branch of that. And that's a very deliberate choice, is to just, you could ignore all the God and the devil stuff about it and see it as kind of a relationship drama about a father and son who fell out a very long time ago and never really made any effort to repair that.
And it would work in that way, but I think for me, because I just have read this over the last couple of days, it works all the more because of the sort of that religious context, if you like, because it is almost like the sequel to Paradise Lost in a really odd way. And I'll tell you what I loved about it. It was I liked the interpretation of accepted religious events. I like the way that you interpreted it. Even Abe accepting that the world has put a spin on things that Nick did, and it's put him in the worst possible light.
Nick is the devil and Abe is God. Yes.
Yes. So
yeah, no, I know what you mean. Yeah.
And Nick's fighting his own corner, saying, all them down there, they all these guys around here at this point, because he's walking among us, they all think it's this way and that way, and you just let them think that, when we know how it was. And when you find out how things were, you're like, yeah, I could see, you can see where the rift is between them, and this almost like a sense of betrayal. You can almost, you can see it from the devil's point of view.
Well, that was
And
very important for me. Is that this was not a goodie and a baddie thing. You know, Nick is very much a bit. You know, he's a bit of an arrogant sort of prick in some ways, and he's made some mistakes that he won't own up to. But again, seeing him as relatable, you couldn't have him as this like cackling, hooded, you know, goateed sort of evil figure because that would not work for this story. Is do you know what I mean?
uh,
It was very important to make him relatable for this story to work.
I think that in the same way that people can look at a character like, say, Loki in the Marvel Universe movies, and they can see that,
Yes,
yeah, he's kind of the bad guy in some ways, but he's also kind of cool. Nick has that kind of vibe where you can go, yeah, I know that traditionally this is the bad guy, but I'm also rooting for him. And I think you played it very cleverly. I think it's such a nice story. It's really well written. Um, my eyes filled up a couple of times, which
oh,
never ever
thank you.
happens for me when I'm reading a book.
Which bits did that? Can I ask?
It was there was I don't want to give sort of any of the
No.
lines away, because what I hope is that people who haven't read the book will come to it if they're listening to this and come away. But there was a thing about the misconception about who is worshipping whom, and just the way that that is phrased and the way that that was built up to, and the admiration that Abe has as he expresses this. And that was, I can't remember what the second point was, but that was definitely one where my eyes just went. I was like, oh my God, you know, because that is probably something to do with being a father as well,
Of course, yeah.
with my kids, and just saying, yeah, that is how it is, that you do admire your creation, you do admire your children that way. And I hope that I hope that all parents do. But certainly it just tapped into something. That's the thing with the story. You're writing about two people who are, to both you and I, both being atheists, these aren't real people. But there are so
Sure.
many people out there who've built their entire life around the idea of these, what we think of as being completely fictional characters, aren't fictional to a lot of people. They obviously believe these people to be real.
Sure, yeah.
But for me to have these characters that I've always thought, or thought since I was something like 11 years old, that this is pure fiction, to then read about them and have them delivered to me in a way that feels really real, and the emotions in the book are real. It just tapped into something, man. You've done it with that book. Like it is
Well, thank you
really,
very much.
really good. I can't recommend it enough. I got
Something
just
that
sucked in.
I was very important for me when I wrote that book, which just kind of enabled me to tell it in the way I wanted to tell it, which fits with what you just described, was in kind of it's a very simple thing, but you know when you're writing, you just come up with an idea, and it's almost like the skeleton key, and you're like,
Yes.
that's how I can unlock all those doors. You
Yeah.
know, just this is the thing, and it was having their concept of time different to ours. So we see the creation of the world, and if you believe in Christianity, not the bonkers version where they think the world's like 500 years old, but I mean, you know, more modern traditional Christianity where they believe in science, they believe in evolution, all of that. They just think that God started it, basically.
Yeah.
If you believe in that, you think that God and the devil and all of that happened. They did the creation of the world, and the fall of Satan and all that started billions of years ago. So to us, this war between God and the devil, if you like, has been going on for billions of years. But I thought it's impossible to imagine because we only live for like a century. Can you imagine being 100 and still being mad at someone that you didn't like at school? You'd be over it by then, wouldn't you? You couldn't still be holding a grudge at that point. You couldn't still give a crap 90 years later. So I thought the
Yeah.
way to imagine this kind of family fallout in a realistic sense is what if it hasn't been that long by their standards? These are immortal beings. What if by their standards, Nick, who's the devil, was a young man, he was in early 20s, relatively speaking, when this happened, and he's now about 40? What if does that make sense? What
Absolutely.
if,
Yeah, it does.
to their view of the reality, because of how they move through the universe and because of their existence as compared to ours, that it's like our longitude of existence versus a fruit fly that lives for a day, you know? it's like stuff that matters to that fruit fly we're going to have forgotten about seconds later, because I mean, the fruit fly doesn't have consciousness of existence the way that we do, but assuming that they did, if you only live for 24 hours, stuff that happens every 5 minutes is going to be significant to you. Whereas if you live for 100 years, you're going to forget things quite quickly that don't matter that much. You know, like, oh, I stumped my toe this morning. That's annoying for about 2 minutes, but then you've forgotten about it. Whereas if you only live for a day and you're going to spend that whole day with a bruised foot, that stumping your toe is a big deal.
Yeah.
So compare that. So I thought, to have these beings as guys who live for so long, the way to make that relatable is to say that to them it doesn't seem that long. It's so yeah. The fall of Lucifer and everything, and Nick as he's known in this, was about, by their reckoning, about 2 decades earlier than this. So it still makes sense that they'd be at the point where they can kind of talk about it, but there's still hurt feelings there, and it kind of makes it a bit more fresh rather than talking about, remember that thing that happened 4 billion years ago? You know, it's that when I've made the decision to do that everything just kind of fell into place with regards to how I could play this.
What made you want to write a book about those two characters?
I've always been fascinated by that kind of story of the devil, because I was always that really annoying kid for my parents and my teachers who just asked questions that they couldn't answer. And it was one of the reasons that I stopped believing in Father Christmas when I was about 8. Because, you know, when you just think, nah, this don't work. You know, like I remember finding some Christmas presents that I'd been bought, which I'd asked for, in the loft accidentally. I was going up there to help my mum get some Christmas decorations down, I believe. And I could see them in the corner. I think there was a Batcave from the 1989 Batman and that kind of thing. And I said, well, that's my Christmas presents that I've asked for. What are they doing here? You know, Father Christmas brings them. And my mum was like, oh no, we buy them and send them to him, and then if you're good, he brings them back. But immediately I was like, why would you do
bullshit
that?
on it.
Do you know what I mean? Why would you waste that much postage? Why would you waste that money? Is he gonna keep them if I don't get them? Then why would you do that? I know my mum and dad didn't have enough money to be wasting, you know. So immediately, you know, when it just kind of shatters, and it was like, yeah, nah, this isn't real. But it didn't matter, because I was never kind of a magical thinking child anyway. I've always been quite sort of logical and reality based in that sense. And the bottom line is, I'd asked for certain things that I really wanted for Christmas. My mum and dad loved me enough to make an effort to make that happen. So does it matter that they were coming from them as opposed to some magical fat guy I've never met? You know,
exactly.
It didn't matter. The bottom line was the same. So it didn't matter to me. And it was kind of the same with Christianity, is that I always had questions that couldn't be answered. And something that always bothered me is this concept in Christianity, the key underlining thing about Christianity, which I really like about it, even as an atheist, is this idea of forgiveness. This idea of, you know what? You can fuck up, people do, but if you're genuinely sorry about it, and you not just saying it like, you know, oh, I'll just do a load of stuff. I never understand that with mafia. How can you be a career criminal and a Catholic? That doesn't make it. If you genuinely believe that you genuinely believe that there's an afterlife waiting for you where you're going to be judged for your sins, how can you think that a life of crime tallies up with that? And this idea that you can just go into church and confess it all and then, oh, your slate's wiped clean, that just doesn't make any sense to me. But if you're genuinely repentant, the idea that, you know what, you can be forgiven for that. That this creative being who's like this father figure is going to be willing to let that go, because how can you ever move on from it? You cannot be defined by one mistake that you've made or something, you know?
Yeah.
I always liked that idea. I thought that was a very noble, because forgiveness is not easy to do at all, but I think it's one of the greatest traits of humanity when we do that. And when you do see people who've been given a second chance and have turned their life around, and who maybe they used to be something really bad and now they're not. And, you know, when you get people who used to be like a career criminal of some sort, and now they're like a counsellor with people in youth services to prevent them going down the same route and that kind of thing. Those are the most amazing people to me when you think, but they've been able to become that through forgiveness, through society saying, we will let you have another chance. So that concept I always thought was great, even as someone who doesn't believe in the spiritual aspect of it. But what about the devil? Why is he not
Yes.
being given that? And what if he asked for it? Would he be given it? Would he be given a no because you've got to stay in this role? No, we need a villain, so no, you can't be forgiven because then that means you're not a villain anymore. So, it never quite fit. And I'd never seen anything tackle this in fiction, in pop culture, in novels. And the only thing that come anywhere close to it was there was a cartoon series in the late 90s called Bob the Devil and God. I don't know
Right.
if you've ever seen that.
I
It only
didn't see
lasted
that,
about
no.
10 episodes. I feel if it came out now, it would do much better because there's much more room now in the world for like adult cartoons. Whereas at this time, when that came out, there was The Simpsons, and that was pretty much it. So I think it kind of landed at the wrong time, or South Park as well. But it basically it deals with God decides to end the world because he's had enough of it. But he decides, you know what? I'm going to give humanity one last chance to prove that they are worth saving. So I'll not kickstart the apocalypse. But the devil says that's not fair. You did this before with the flood, so this time I get to pick who this one person is. So he picks this guy named Bob, who's like the laziest, stupidest, drunkenest layabout, because he thinks it's a sure thing that God's going to watch this guy for a day and think, now we're done. I'm ending the world. But despite those traits, what God sees in Bob is that he's a very loving father and he's a very hardworking husband. Yeah, he drinks. Yeah, he's lazy. Yeah, he's a bit dim, but he's got a heart as big as our outdoors, and that is what God sees in him. And he decides, yeah, the world's worth saving. But he then decides to make Bob his kind of new prophet, and that's what the series is about. There's
I'll
one
have to try and
episode.
find that.
It's really funny. It's really funny. There's one episode where the devil, it's his birthday, and God does not want to acknowledge it. And when he finally calls him on it, he says, it's because you were my favourite, and the memories of what happened between us are too painful for me, so I don't like to acknowledge the day that I created you. And
Right.
I thought that was really great, but they just leave it at that. They don't go any further than that on any of the episodes. And I thought you had a golden opportunity there to do something no one's ever done, which is to genuinely analyse this relationship between these characters as father and son, which no one ever does. And it was that cartoon was kind of the final straw really for me, which thought, no one's going to tell this story, so I'm going to have to do it. So then I just started thinking about different versions of the devil in fiction, different versions of God, although there's a lot fewer versions of God as a corporeal being, and just how I wanted to represent that, really. And I thought the devil, there's this idea of this super competitive sort of person who the first child, who was the most beloved child, who was told he was amazing, who was told he was perfect, who was told he was the best at everything, and then suddenly the dad's got another baby who gets all the attention now.
Yes.
And
And
that's
these are
how
all
I
real
thought,
feelings.
yes, very much so.
So it's all very relatable. That's the thing with these massive beings brought down to our level. And it turns out they have the same petty squabbles and excuses for not putting out the olive branch that we do. And I thought it was
Exactly, but
just very
it's
well
like, if
done.
I could, thank you very much. But it was about portraying this big cosmic event in that sense. So, like, imagine you're that first child and you're a little bit older, and you were always loved and everything else, but now a lot of the attention goes to the younger sibling who's like, say, 10 years younger than you. So this kid's about 12 and you're like in your mid-20s, and you think, oh, so you decide, you know what, I'm going to give him some of my beer from my stash and he'll get drunk, and then mum and dad will be mad at him. And you do that, and they do get mad at him, but they're mad at you as well. And you're like, what are you mad at me for? And they're like, because he's your little brother. You shouldn't be trying to...
You're the one who fed him it.
Exactly. You shouldn't be doing that just to get him in trouble, just to prove a point. Yes, we know he's capable of bad things. We know you are too, but what were you trying to prove by doing this? It's as much your fault as his. And it's kind of like trying to frame that initial thing in the Garden of Eden in that manner,
Yes.
as in, you're their big brother, you're supposed to look after them, you're not supposed to do shit like this. That was the way I sort of sought to do this as like a family drama rather than this big cosmic heaven and hell fighting on a battlefield sort of thing.
I think I'd like to have a chat with you now about the first of your books that I read, because for all Nick and Abe's the first you released, it isn't the first one of your works that I read.
Okay.
The first of your books that I came to, I got to read it out loud to an audience of two. So my two sons, Archie and Oscar, both enjoyed The Old One and the Sea. I bought it for Archie for Christmas when they came to stay over. We were doing a chapter a night, and both thoroughly enjoyed it. Archie's 7, so he's really ready for it, and he was trying to think of what's happening next and everything.
Sure,
And Oscar, he was 4 at the time, so he was keeping up with it well. He understood it and everything.
That's nice.
But definitely Archie was really, really, he was really into it and really thinking about it. And I'll tell you a thing that they both really liked was, because I've got a big volume of all of Lovecraft's work, and I was reading through some of it at the time that we were reading The Old One and the Sea. And they loved that there's this connection between this book that they love and this massive tome with a really cool cover that's sitting on my coffee table. And they were like,
that's really nice. Yeah, that was really nice to hear. Thank you.
So they could see this is what you come on to eventually.
Yeah.
So obviously that writing that kid's book is a big change of direction really for you. What made you want to do that?
Well, just to explain what it is, The Old One and the Sea is a reimagining of the origin of the H.P. Lovecraft Cthulhu mythos, told as an illustrated children's book. Now, I have seen, and I even own, some like cutesy Cthulhu stuff. But what I hadn't seen is an attempt to tell this story for children as a proper story. There's a lot of stuff where it's like, Cthulhu meets a unicorn, or Cthulhu poops rainbows or whatever, but there's no like genuine, heartfelt story about this creature. And I thought, what if you could do that in a way that was faithful to the mythos, incorporated a lot of it. So there's a lot of stuff in there which, if you are a fan, which obviously you are, you will pick up on, oh, that's this and that's that and that's that, but told in a way that it's not massively confusing. There's also a few Easter eggs in there, like there's a scene where the sailors in the pub are talking about the time that they encountered Cthulhu.
Yes.
And when they talk about their journey, the name of the boat, the coordinates they describe sailing on, and everything is exactly taken from the Call of Cthulhu story that Lovecraft wrote. So there's little things like that which is in there deliberately for the adult readers. But yeah, it was this idea of, could I do this as a genuine story with actual emotion and actual heart to it? And again, it's not silly, it's not cutesy, it's an actual story about a little boy meeting this monster and how that would affect both of their lives. And it ends, I'm not going to spoil the ending, but it ends in such a way that then it doesn't betray the original. Because there'll be a lot of people who'd hear about this as a concept and immediately think, oh, that's stupid, Cthulhu's meant to be this and that and the other. To which I would always say, just read the book, because you might be surprised by how that works in terms of what you think of Cthulhu versus what this story is telling. They do actually tie in. And to me, the best example of this in recent pop culture where you get a surprise like that is with the most recent series of Planet of the Apes films.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I know this. Have you seen those?
Yes, I have, yeah.
Right, now, I know this is a bit of a diversion, but bear with me because it does explain the point I'm trying to illustrate. I'm trying to explain it without spoilers, you see, for my own. But,
exactly.
But you get the first of the new Planet of the Apes film, and everyone's immediately like, oh, it's a reboot. Oh, we don't need a reboot of this. Oh, the classic one's perfect. Halfway through this, so this film takes place years and years before the classic Planet of the Apes film. And halfway through, there is a news report about the first manned ship to Mars setting off to Mars, and it's called the Icarus. And they name the pilot, who's Charlton Heston's character, and everything. And then later on in the film, there's another news report saying that ship has gone through a wormhole and they've lost contact with it.
Yes, yeah.
And then you realise, holy crap, it's part of the same universe.
It's part of it, yeah.
It is not a reboot. It is not replacing it. This is that event is
fits in
happening
with it.
right now,
Yeah,
thousands of years in the future. It is the same story. And that, when you realise that, you think, oh, that's so clever.
yeah,
And
yeah,
whilst I wouldn't claim to have achieved the same thing, the way that the ending of The Old One and the Sea works is it's designed to give you that same sort of thing. Like if you had some sort of doubt about how this ties in with the actual Cthulhu mythos, you will read that ending, hopefully, and think, I see. I see
yeah.
how this works.
And those, obviously those Easter eggs are definitely there for the adults. You know, I obviously I picked up straight away the stories taking place in Innsmouth,
Yeah.
and you know, things like to do with the stars looking different and things like that. That some of that we weren't seeing the stars that we would usually see,
Yeah.
and so there's loads of things in there that I picked up on, and they are there to kind of, I guess, they are there to tickle the adult who knows.
Yes, very
Um,
much.
and like you say, though, there were moments in there as I was getting towards the end of the book where I went, shit, I can see what's happening here. And obviously the boys wouldn't know that, but then like that's kind of how we made the connection between the thing that I'm reading and the thing that I'm reading to them, the thing that they're enjoying, which they really like. So I know that they've got Lovecraft to come to in years to come, you know, and hopefully they're going to be able to look back and go, remember that story that Dad got us and read
Yeah,
to us,
that's
you
lovely
know,
to think.
and they'll just
Yeah.
stitch it together, you know. I kind of wanted to ask you as well. I can connect it to Nick and Abe as well, but obviously we know that Lovecraft has a problematic history. There,
Sure.
yeah, and I just wondered with Nick and Abe, I was meant to ask you, did you get any backlash at all, you know, from anybody who's read it and the sort of, has anybody come at you thinking it's blasphemous or anything like that?
No, I got a couple of reviews that said sort of like, "Oh, it's not how I choose to think of God and the devil or whatever." But and I think there was a couple of people who complained about the fact that I think at one point God's got a beer or something,
Yeah, yeah.
and Abe, and they didn't like that, but not vastly so. No, to be honest, I would have quite liked if they were, because stuff like that boosts sales, doesn't it?
Yeah,
You
I a
know,
little
if,
bit of controversy.
you know, I wouldn't have minded that, to be honest.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I didn't really get a response like that. No, and with regards to Lovecraft, it's
Mm.
very clear that this is not, even though the little boy in the book is meant to be Howard Lovecraft. It's a
Yeah.
very fictional version of him. It's not really him. It's not dealing with him as an adult.
No.
Shies far away from all of that. So it's, you know, it's a children's book about, it's basically a little boy who shares his name and some of the, you know,
Absolutely.
it's not a biography.
I was
But
kind of thinking it's this is almost like the Snowman for horror fans to read to their kids.
that's a very flattering comparison, and it's actually the sort of tone I was going for,
Yeah,
because like the Snowman, it's got a slightly melancholy feel to it.
yeah, it does. Yeah,
It's not like a happy, cheery story. But do you know why I did that? Is because when I think about the stories that meant the most to me when I was a child, it's always the ones that kind of hit you with something, where something in it, whether it was the beginning, the end, the middle, or the whole thing, had like a sadness where you were forced to feel this. You know, you're like something Disney films have a habit of doing, and I'm not always, but quite commonly, and I don't like it. Is they'll have a really sad bit, and then immediately afterwards they'll do a happy, silly bit to
they'll have
kind
a
of just,
song.
yeah. So like Mufasa dies, and then immediately after you've got Hakuna Matata. You know, it's
Mm.
like
Yeah,
no, don't do that. Let the kids feel it, because they will remember it more if they feel it. You know, because sad things happen. You need to put, you know. So
yes.
when you think about things like the horse dying on Neverending
Oh
Story, or
Jesus, yeah. Oh
Optimus
God.
Prime dying on Transformers movie, and you know
Oh
these bits where partway through the film you get hit by something and it's sad and awful. It makes that, but then other things happen afterwards, as in it's like suggesting that life doesn't stop because someone's died or because something awful's happened. You have to carry on. Things do get better. You know, you will get through this. Those are the stories that you remember. Those are the stories that mean something to you. Those are the films and the books that you will share with your own children. Whereas just the happy, silly, you know, lovely ones where nothing bad happens, it comes and goes. There's no staying power to that. You're not going to be reading those stories to your own kid.
you're right there. I do think there's something about emotional intelligence for kids in these stories, isn't there? That we've got to give them fuel to let those emotions grow and to learn how to deal with those
Yeah.
emotions in a healthy way. And good fiction will hopefully, good fiction helps adults deal with things, helps you
Oh,
see
very
another
much.
way, doesn't
Very
it?
much. Yeah.
So I think, yeah, there is some responsibility to, and like you say, some media do, they kind of shy away from it a little bit, but there's definitely, it's good that you've identified that and you got the right measure, because it's my kids didn't come away from the book depressed by any stretch of the
No.
imagination, but like you say, there's just this melancholy vibe to the thing, and there's loads of beautiful, lovely, touching moments and stuff like that, but there is just that pervading thing about certain things being temporary, that nothing can
Yes,
last for as
exactly.
long as you want it to. But that's real, and my kids know that. Like, even if it's as simple as knowing that you can't eat sweets all day long every day,
Yeah.
there's got to be, sometimes you've got to kind of come away from the things that you like.
But it's better. But the snowman is a classic example of that. In that, like,
Mm,
he's only going to be there for that short period of time. But isn't it better that you had him at all rather than?
yes.
Do you know? It's like the sweets. It's like you can't eat sweets all day, sure, because you'll feel sick and you'll not get the right nutrition and you'll damage your teeth. But that means that when you do get sweets, it's that much more special
Yeah,
because you've had
absolutely.
it for that moment and
If you have the
you've
good stuff
enjoyed
all the
it.
time, you've got nowhere else to go from there. So
Yes.
nothing's going to
Yeah.
feel as good as that. So no, I think, honestly, I can't recommend that one enough. I really enjoyed it. I think, to be honest with you, I would have still enjoyed it just reading it to myself.
Oh,
Um,
thank you.
but it was really special. I felt like it was, such a special thing to share with the kids as well, because I kind of felt like, I'm reading them their first horror book, and and it's not going to terrify them, but it's, they've now got this little connection. There's just, I feel like I'm kind of holding the curtain open to say there's loads of cool stuff like that behind here. When you're ready for it,
Yeah,
you'll come to
that's
it.
really nice. Yeah, I like that thought.
So you've gone down the traditional publishing route with
Yeah.
each of your books, haven't you? Do
Yes.
you get tempted to put something out yourself? How do
No,
you feel?
no, honestly, not at all because I don't have the time, scope,
Mm,
financial resources, or anything to do that. I honestly want the old fashioned simplicity of I've written something, I send it off, they take care of the rest, until it's time for me to promote it or do things like this or do book signings or anything like that. They do the admin of it because that's just my preference. I don't have any critical opinion about self-publishing. It's absolutely equally valid, and less an author if that's the method that you've gone down. It's not for me. It takes more time and commitment and admin ability and everything else than I could commit to it. So I want the old-fashioned sort of I'll do the creative bit, someone else does the admin.
let them stick to their specialisms.
Yeah, because I'm not good at all of that stuff. So I hate people who think they can do everything. Some can, some absolutely can. But when you can see people who've clearly made their own front cover,
Yeah, 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 yeah.
you don't want to be that guy. So this is my point. It's like, you know what? I can't draw. I'm not doing the front cover. I'm not going to pay a friend of mine £5 to do it either. I'm going to have that done by a professional cover artist.
Yeah, let them
You know,
shell out on the.
like if I've got an audio book, I'm not narrating it myself. There's that kind of thing. So I'm very much for going down, even though it's more difficult and takes longer, and you quite possibly end up with less work out there. I am much. For me, it's very much a case of no, it's traditional or nothing for me.
Yeah, so you've got patience.
Yeah, but it's also because it's not it's not my primary source of income. It's a side hustle for
Yeah,
me.
yeah.
So that takes a lot of the pressure off it in that regard.
If you could go back and give yourself some advice, some writing advice, what would be one tip that you would go back and give to your younger writing self?
Um, Probably to start a little bit earlier. I think I wasted a lot of years with ideas in my head before I actually put them down. I actually remember the conversation that made me start putting them down properly as an adult. I was talking to a very good friend of mine who I'm still friends with now, um, and I was talking to him about this idea I had for a series of stories, and I just basically sat down one day and we just spoke about it, and I told him, and he's like, "You really need to write that." So I did, and then
Mm-hmm.
started sending him in chapters and everything, and he got really like massively into it. So much so that he started asking if he could let other people read it, and he did, and it kind of went from there. And it's something that it's a serialized version of a few stories, which I can't think of the right term. It's like it's like the Harkins books I was describing earlier. It's a series of novels that's kind of episodic in nature, which I will return to and redraft and find a publisher for at some point.
Mm-hmm.
But I had those ideas for that, and writing those then spurred me on to write something. I never wrote those with a view to getting published at that point. I then wrote something else afterwards, and something else, and something else, and then Nick and Abe. But from having the fully formed ideas for that serialized set of stories to actually bothering to write them was about 4 years.
Right.
And I just think I could have done that when I first had those ideas, and then I'd have had 4 more years worth of newer other ideas and more writing and more. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And was there any of that sort of? Do you think any of that anxiety maybe was eating away at that, stopping you from getting involved?
I don't know if it's anxiety. I don't know what the term is, but I can tell you exactly what it was, and still is to some degree, but I've kind of thought past it. What it is that I don't have anyone in my family who's done anything like that.
Right.
So if you're growing up and you want to be an actor, and your uncle Stephen is an actor, and he's in proper films and proper plays, and he was in 3 episodes of Doctor Who, and he's done, you're going to look and see that as a perfectly achievable goal, because it's like growing up and wanting to be a mechanic, and your dad's a mechanic. You can see it. You know someone who does it, so of course it's possible. But I don't have anyone in my family. I didn't have anyone in my family growing up who was an actor or a singer or a writer or nothing like that. So something like getting a book published was something that happened to other people. That was not something that there was no path that I could see wherein I could achieve it.
I understand, yeah. I was the same.
Because I couldn't look at anyone and see, well, Uncle Steve did it, so why not me? I didn't have that figure in any respect of the arts where I could look and it kind of brought it down to earth. It was something you saw on television, which was people a million miles away. It was not something that I would be able to do. And I think that stopped me from even trying for so long.
Did you ever get the Writers and Artists Yearbook?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, I remember a friend of mine, he's another writer, Dave Basnett. I remember working with him 20 years ago, and we were talking about writing. We just kind of, we were working in the same office, and we just kind of noticed each other just, scribbling stuff into notebooks and stuff on our lunch breaks and things. Are you a writer? Yeah, well, I'm a writer too, And I remember him talking about this Writers and Artists Yearbook, and I was like, what? There's this whole book that gets printed every year that's got all the publishers and all the agents' details in there. And that just felt like there was just this whole other world that opened up the minute that I opened that book up. But like you say, I didn't know anybody who had gone down that path before.
Sure, it makes so much difference, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
It sounds like such a romantic way to phrase it, but it brings the stars closer. If you want to do something in the arts and you know somebody who's already done it brings the stars that much closer to you, because you now have someone right there who, and I don't even mean in the sense that you can ask them for advice and stuff. I don't even mean that. I just mean the fact that a real tangible person who has done this thing already that you want to do, or something similar to it.
Just the acknowledgement
means exactly
that it can happen. Yes.
It's not just people on telly. It's not just people in LA. It's people who sit in the same house you do sometimes and have the same Christmas dinner, and and they have done that thing that you want to do, which means you can do it as well. And if you haven't got that, it's that much more difficult to convince yourself that it's actually a possibility.
So I guess we can translate that all into advice for new writers who might be listening to this, and that don't sit around waiting, start writing now. If you've got
There's
a
no
pen,
reason you
you've
can't
got
do
some
it.
paper.
There's absolutely no reason you can't do it with regards to being who you're from, where you're from, who you know, who you don't know. None of that really matters. Some of the greatest success stories with writers are people who had no connections to writing whatsoever.
True.
So it doesn't matter that, and conversely, it doesn't work that way in reverse either. Just because your dad was like a world famous author, you get that where someone was, and then they someone's mum or whatever was an amazing playwright, and then they decide to have a go and they're a bit crap. it doesn't mean anything that
That's
you've
got to
got
be
someone
worse.
in your family.
That's got to be worse, hasn't it?
The pressure, yeah.
Can you imagine the reviews? Shitting all over their mother's legacy.
Yeah, it's bad, that, isn't it?
Rags to riches to rags in 2 generations.
Just the pressure of living up to that. But
oh God,
yeah. It's. But that would be the advice, I think. You just, if you've got a story to tell, then tell it. But tell that story. That's the other. I don't really do advice because it's not something like, if people want to become a doctor, it's okay, work hard in school, work hard in college, do a medical degree at university, and then you do your 7 years residency, and then you pick what you want to do, whether you're a diagnostician or you're a GP or whatever. It's pretty much a clear set path for everyone who wants to be a doctor. You can't have that with writing. There isn't anything like that with writing. Everyone comes to it in a completely different way. Some people went to university and studied it. Some didn't. Some have got qualifications in writing. Some haven't. Some got published traditionally. Some didn't. Some got the very first book published and became a multimillionaire. Some people have got 50 books out and are still not a multimillionaire. There's no set route with being a writer. So you can't tell people, well, this is how you do it. I'll tell you, ABC, write it down. It doesn't work like that. So what I would say is, if you've got a story that you want to tell, then get it written down, and also make sure it's your own. Don't look at what's popular now and try and write that. Like when 50 Shades of Grey were out, how many BDSM erotica amateur things came out on Kindle immediately afterwards, from everyone thinking, oh, I'll have a go. It's like, how many vampire romance things come out in the wake of Twilight? How many post-apocalyptic teen things come out with Hunger Games? It's like, just don't do that. Just tell your own story. We don't need another one that's just like the thing we've all just read.
That's it, isn't it? Just try and set the trend, not follow the trend.
Don't follow it. Just write what you want to write, and it doesn't matter if it's not the most popular thing ever. That's not what it's about. You should be telling it because you want to tell it. Don't just be trying to chase what's already popular.
I think that is good. That's really good advice. And in that way, people won't be, new writers wouldn't be too hung up on, well, I've got this story to tell, but now I'm going to have to hammer it into that template, or I'm going to have to hammer it into that sort of shape. You don't have to do that. You just get your story down and work at it and work at it and work at it. And if the stars align, then you just might get it out there. Lex, what's the best jumping on point? So anybody listening to this who hasn't read one of your books yet, what's the best jumping on point for them to get a really good feel for your storytelling?
It honestly depends what they're into. If you like horror, I've got a bunch of short stories in various different anthologies. So you can read, one of my stories and then like 9 others by arguably much better authors than me in the same book. So even if you don't like mine,
I think you can be kinder to yourself than that.
Now, not with some names that were in some books I've somehow managed to squeeze into. When you look on the sort of the list of who's in it, and you see my name, you think, why am I in that? I don't know how that's happened. I've just been given spectacular opportunities by publishers, which I'm very, very grateful for. But if you buy one of them, then even if you don't like my story, you might like some of the others. So if you like horror, then there's various anthologies that I'm in, and you find them all on Amazon. Also, if you want the children's book, if either for yourself to kind of enjoyable for adults, I believe.
It certainly is.
Then there's The Old One on the Seat. If you more like your crime stuff, I've written a crime. I don't think you've read that one, but I've written a crime one called The Other Side of the Mirror.
Yeah, I've heard you talking about that one on another podcast recently as well, and I'm intrigued by it. Am I right if I'm thinking along the lines of like a Dark City
Yeah, it's like a Sin
terminal
City
type?
sort of, yeah, very, very noir, very gritty, with
Hmm.
that kind of, not like excessive gore or anything like that, but it is very sort of grim and gritty and like a detective story.
Hmm.
And then there's Nick and Abe, which is more like a literary fantasy with like a family drama. So it really, with regards to jumping on point, it's not like my books are like, like if someone said, "Oh, what's the jumping on point for Lord of the Rings?" You'd start with The Hobbit, wouldn't you? Because there's like a narrative
Yeah, yeah.
through. My books are not all connected or anything like that. So there isn't one that I would recommend you reading first as kind of a way into it. It really does depend on what genre you like to read.
Well, I'm going to put some Amazon links up to your work on the
Yeah.
show notes anyway, so I'll steer people as best I can. But I certainly can recommend Nick and Abe, and I can absolutely recommend The Old One in the Sea. Where can we find you on social media, Alex?
I do have the Facebook author page, which is just Lex H Jones. I don't use that much. I find it's a bit tricky to interact via that because Facebook has all these like
Yeah,
algorithms and stuff,
yeah, they
and
screwed it for
basically
us.
unless you're paying a fortune to get your page seen, people just don't see it.
Yeah,
So
no,
the
they hunt
best
us,
place
mate.
for me, yeah, it's terrible, isn't it? But basically, for the best place for me, really, is probably Twitter, which is at Lex H Jones, and I post. I don't like to spam stuff all the time, so I'm not constantly on there going buy this book, buy this book. When I've got a new release coming, then obviously
Mhm.
I'll promote it. But most of the time, I'm interacting with other authors and talking about their work and just so people often ask me questions and stuff on Twitter, which I respond to and that kind of thing. So Twitter is quite good for that. I don't get into all the politics of it and what bandwagon are we all jumping on today?
It's
I
just a
don't do all that
minefield out
shit.
there, isn't it?
There's no point because whatever hashtag you support, whatever you try and 5 weeks from now, someone will decide that we're wrong. So
Yeah,
it's like no, just don't. I just stay out of that. I'm not there for that. I'm there for interacting with people, having a laugh, sharing things that make people happy, sharing other people's work, sharing my work, answering questions, helping people with things if I can.
nothing wrong with that, mate. That's a nice way to be. Spot on, mate. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on. I'm looking
Thank
forward
you.
to the final case book of Mortimer Grimm. And I'd love to have you back on again at that time. We'll have a chat about that if you're up for it. We'll get you back
Yes,
on and
that'd be
drill
very
right into
nice.
that
Thank you.
because
Yeah,
that's a bit of
very
me,
much.
that book there. Thanks again, mate. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Fiendish Minds. Don't forget to like and subscribe and follow the link below for today's show notes where you can find reading lists and more information about today's guests. Thanks for listening. Catch you next time.